You know, right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, you may have seen our guest only on SNY, but he's been a lot of other places as well. And we are going to discuss all that here today with our special guest.
Yes, I'm really excited for this. I think he's multi-talented, multi-dimensional talent, especially on air. He's a nightly anchor for SNY right now, full-time, former play-by-play broadcaster and sideline reporter at ESPN, for Notre Dame lacrosse player. And this is the first time we're going to have a lacrosse player on the show. So got some lacrosse questions ready to go. I'm really excited about that. We welcome on the Big Red Dog, Eamon McAnaney. I mean, Eamon, where did you get that nickname, first and foremost? Because it's a pretty unique nickname.
Yeah, that was a freshman year Notre Dame thing where, let's just say, I maybe had some things go wrong on the team, like I either forgot a jacket or might have been late for practice or got to the bus at the wrong time. I was a little absent-minded as a freshman, so the seniors thought I was like their Clifford the Big Red Dog, always getting in trouble. So that's, once it's on Wikipedia, you never live it down. But that one's a long one. That's going back to 1988, spring of 1988. So that's how I got that one.
We had the Moose on, Mark Melissa.
Yeah.
Now we got the Big Red Dog, Eamon. I don't know like how old your kids are, but did you know they're making a live action Clifford the Big Red Dog? Have you been contacted to be in that?
I have not, but certainly when guys were little, when we watched the videos and read the books, I started to realize they called me that. So I'll have to check that out when that gets done.
So we'll start at the beginning here. You're growing up as a kid. I'm guessing you were a big sports fan. What gravitated you more towards lacrosse other than the other sports, or is it really just that was your best sport?
No, I was really late to lacrosse. I grew up in New York City, and we didn't really have it at all. I mean, I watched a couple of games on TV because at the time when I was really young, 1977, 1978, one of the best players in the country was named Eamon McAnaney. He played at Cornell. He was a Long Island guy, a great athlete. And so my parents showed me some articles about him. So I watched it, and I watched him. But there were no leagues in New York City. I was a baseball, basketball guy growing up as a kid. I went to boarding school in Pennsylvania called the Hill School, where they had lacrosse, and I noticed it. It was kind of the cool sport, and I just took to it, liked it because it was looked a lot like basketball with a combination of football. So I thought, let's give that a shot. The baseball team at the Hill School was really good. Even if I'd made it, I probably wouldn't have played that much. So I'm like, let's give this a shot as a spring sport. And I fell in love with it right away. I mean, I still think it's the greatest sport out there. I totally understand that people don't agree with me or don't understand it or don't want to buy it. But to me, it's the combination of like basketball, but yet you can hit people. I never really played hockey, so I don't appreciate the true speed of hockey, but lacrosse moves really quickly as well. So I just think it has the ability, or it has a combination of playmaking sport with physical contact. So that's what I loved about it.
What was the recruiting process like when you were ending up going to Notre Dame?
I was a walk-on. I wasn't a big-time player. Notre Dame has grown a lot in lacrosse since I graduated. I just kept my fingers crossed that I could make the team. The tryouts were pretty tough, but luckily they needed a few defensemen. So I was able to make the team and improve through my 4 years. So I hung around and got enough playing time to be a captain as a senior. But you talk about completely different worlds. The lacrosse world now, as far as recruiting, as opposed to back in the late 1980s, is completely different. But luckily for me, Notre Dame wasn't big time yet, and I was able to get on the team, and I had a blast, made friends for life. And, now when they go to the Final Four, people think I was good. So I'm like, okay, I'll take it. Sure.
So question about the professional lacrosse leagues that we have in this country, because we have a few.
Sure.
Major League Lacrosse, Field Lacrosse, the National Lacrosse League, obviously the indoor one, and the Premier Lacrosse League, which started up last year, and one of the major investors is Peter Chernin. So he's got a pretty good stake in that. You're a huge lacrosse guy, former player, broadcaster, right? You've worked in now for mostly your whole entire life, for the better part of 3 decades. What would your advice for those leagues be if they want to start kicking off in this country and maybe supplant one of the 4 pro sports that we have as one of the major ones? What advice would you give to the commissioners, the players, the teams, the leagues, so on?
Wow. Just sell, sell, sell. I think you got to market and you have to rally the base. You have to email, Twitter, and direct message every youth lacrosse coach, every youth lacrosse player. You have to make your games an event. And they try. I did a bunch of Lizard games with the MLL. I think the MLL schedule kind of hurt them being a complete summer league. After you go through a whole spring season of playing lacrosse on the Long Island, people want to go to the beach during the summer. So that's kind of tough. I also think, but I think that's what I would do. You have to rally that base, and then you have to find a way to make it important enough that a network cares about you, which I think happened with the PLL, to promote sport during other big events so that you get non-lacrosse fans. That's the key. The lacrosse fan is one person you have to get to your game and watch your game on TV, but you got to find a way to sell it and get that non-lacrosse fan to buy in and become a lacrosse fan. Because right now, I think that's a very tough sell. The mainstream sports fan does not buy into lacrosse. So really the only people you get going to these games right now are youth lacrosse league players and high school players and their families. And at some point the sport has to branch out of that.
Yeah. And I think lacrosse athletes are one of the better athletes around. The conditioning you need to be running up and down them and soccer players, but you're not seeing them on TV. They're not making the fortune. So the younger athletes tend to be trending away from, those two sports. But there are programs out there, and we'll see what happens and move forward here. So Notre Dame, you are there, obviously a really great academic school. So I'm sure it was challenging at times. What are some of your best memories of Notre Dame in general there? And how was the football team during your time? And what was it like going to football games there?
It was awesome. I mean, it was amazing. I remember a buddy of mine, we used to talk a lot for our friends went to school and college, and they always talk about how great the head of the Charles was. It was a big rowing competition, and everyone descends on Harvard, Boston College, BU, and it's a great party weekend. And my friends like, well, we get that 5-6 times a year with Notre Dame football games. And especially when I went there, I was very fortunate. My first home game as a freshman in 1987, Tim Brown runs back 2 punts for touchdowns and is on his way to winning a Heisman Trophy. So that team was really good. And then the next year was 1988, Notre Dame 31, Miami 30 in the famous Catholics versus Convicts game. And the team went on to win the national championship. So the football team when I was there was awesome. And the games were just these huge events. Like you talk lacrosse. We would have lacrosse practice on Thursday afternoon. So we'd get out to the field at like 3 o'clock. And by the end of practice at like 5:30, the parking lot with all the RVs would be full. So you'd walk out to practice, look out to the right and see this RV parking lot, and there'd be maybe one or two. 2 hours later on Thursday, not Friday, Thursday afternoon, the RV parking lot was packed because everyone from all over the Midwest and really all over the country was descending on South Bend to be there for that big game. So you could not have asked for a better 4 years football-wise than when I was there, to have Brown win the Heisman and then the 88 team win the national championship. So that Miami game is certainly probably the best memory of my 4 years there. Playing lacrosse, no one game stands out to me, but just sort of the bus rides and hanging out with the guys and, the parties we would have afterwards, just the friendships you make being on a team with the same guys for 2-3 years is pretty remarkable and long lasting.
So while you were at school there, is that when you decided that you wanted to pursue a career in television or sports, or did that come to you before you even started going to college at Notre Dame?
It was a little bit before college. And growing up as a kid, it was a lot different now. And the 3 newspapers in New York had all the great columnists, and I would read them, I read all the columnists, Smith, Mike Lupica, Phil Pepe. So I always thought I'd be a writer, because that's what I really like to do. But I also was a huge Warner Wolf fan, let's go to the videotape. So there was, a little bit of that as well, I thought. But I didn't do enough in college. I did a few radio shows and some play-by-play because I was playing lacrosse. But I always thought I'd go into sports to make a living. The passion came, unfortunately, a little bit late, so I didn't do enough in college. But I thought I'd be a sports writer. And then when I couldn't write for the paper at Notre Dame because I didn't have a free time to go cover other teams, I kind of lost interest in it until I graduated. And that's when I got the TV bug. But I didn't have an on-air tape, so I had to kind of start behind the scenes.
So you start behind the scenes with ESPN, great place to start, an associate producer. What was the interview process like there? And then what talent did you end up working with while being an associate producer there?
Right. So before I got the interview at ESPN, I was living in New York with my parents, and I had two side jobs on the weekends. I was a scorer for ABC Sports on college football on Saturdays, and then I was a logger for CBS Sports for NFL coverage on Sundays. And a logger just keeps track of all the big plays. So there's a thing called time code, which when you're recording a game, that marks the big plays. So you mark every play, but so that way they can quickly get to the big play. Hey, let me see that 80-yard touchdown. You're like, it's at 17-13-05. And since I was low person on the totem pole there, I always got these AFC Central games. And, they had good teams, Browns with Bernie Kosar, the Bengals with Boomer Esiason, a good Steeler team, but it wasn't the glamorous conference or the division in the NFL. And certainly at CBS at the time was all NFC. So you really wanted an NFC game. But since, I'll take any assignment I got. So I was getting all these AFC Central games, So then when I went up for my interview at ESPN, there's this person named Al Jaffe, who was the czar. He made or break you. He was the rainmaker. He decided whether you got the job or not. And the interview was about nothing really but your sports knowledge. So, for a guy like me, that was in my wheelhouse. And he knew where I was and who sports teams were. I told him, Giants and Yankees. So he tries to trick you and asks you about teams that you wouldn't normally follow or have a chance to see, who the Giants or Yankees don't normally play. So I got really lucky because he asked me, what are the strengths and weaknesses of every team in the AFC Central? And I'd been watching every AFC Central game for about 12 to 15 weeks. So well, pull up a chair, let me tell you. So I got really lucky with that question, well on the interview. So about a couple months later, a job opened up. And in January of 1992, I started in Bristol and there for almost 5 years. And it was an amazing place to live and learn how TV works, to learn how to be a professional. It's definitely a grind. You're working 6 days a week and ridiculous hours, but you get a chance to work with all the talent when I was there. John Saunders, mainly in college hoops. You get to hand shot sheets to Chris Berman for NFL primetime. Then Sports Center was Bob Lee and Dan Patrick. And then, a few years into it was Bob Lee and Keith Olbermann. Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann, of course. And you can't help but learn from the greatest people. You are watching and working with the greatest people to do those shows. And, I'm not saying you can become them by watching them, but it certainly helps to see how they prepare, how they read a highlight, how they pace a highlight. You really sort of said, man, that's what I want to do when you get a chance to watch those guys do it.
Yeah, and I'm someone who's worked behind the scenes on some shows as well and hand off the shot sheets. So it's quite the thrill when you're young and you're just in there and you get to learn. And even if you're not trying to learn, you're gonna learn some things just by being there. What was your first on-air job and how did that opportunity come about? You mentioned obviously you didn't have much of a tape early on, so I'm assuming a lot of networking paid off for you.
Yeah. So my first on-air job, I got actually because of a guy who I worked with at ESPN named Brian DeVellis. He left ESPN to go get an on-air job with a cable company in northern New Jersey, Bergen County. It was called Channel 10 News. So a couple of years later, we always kept in touch because we were really good friends. So a couple of years after he left, I left ESPN to work for a new company called Classic Sports Network. I was in production, but it was in Manhattan. So I got to move back to New York. And he said, well, look, if you're looking to cover sports and work on your tape, I can use reporters on the weekends. So that was my first on-air experience, was working for him, covering Bergen County high school football and basketball and putting together packages. And then, interestingly enough, Classic Sports Network was bought by ESPN, and they were going to move us all back to Bristol. I didn't really want to go back to Bristol, so I was 30 years old and out of work because I didn't take the job. So I was freelancing, and he snapped his Achilles tendon playing basketball, and he couldn't drive to work, so they needed someone to fill in for him. So I filled in for him for a month, and that's how I got my anchor tape. So I now finally had a legit anchor tape to go with a legit reporter tape. So I was sending those all around the country. And I want to say in 2000, a job opened up in Bangor, Maine, to be the weekend anchor and weekday reporter. So that was my first full-time TV job, was in Bangor, Maine, which I had for a year. And then my same friend, Brian DeNovellis, moved on to News 12 New Jersey. and I replaced him at Channel 10 News. And I finally made it all the way back to the New York area to be full-time. And then there were a lot of winding roads of freelance jobs from there to get to SNY.
So, yeah, News 12, we know you're the host of Sports Time on there. You also did a lot of work for MSG's High School Game of the Week. What was that experience like doing some high school stuff? I'm assuming you were doing, basketball, lacrosse, whatever it may be. But I know at the time, MSG put a lot of emphasis on their high school sports coverage. And I know we've seen guys like Keith Irizarry and Steve Gelbs come out of there as well. But what was your time like with MSG working on the high school games of the week?
It was an amazing experience. I got to work with some great people. It was a great opportunity that Mike Quick gave me. And, you mentioned it. You did not feel like you were doing a podunk high school game, out of an ice cream truck. This was a legit MSG production. It looked good, it felt good, and there was a standard to it. So I knew I had to do a good job or I would hear about it. So, trying to please Mike Quick and, live up to his standard was the main part of the job. But it was, and working with Jimmy Cavallo and Lou Brogno on football was great. But the other thing was high school football in our area is great. So, I got to cover Brian Cushing, went on obviously to the NFL. I got to cover Matt Sims, Ray Rice. I got to cover, I'm drawing a blank now because it was so long ago, but we just got to do some awesome games. And then basketball, you're covering St. Anthony's, and you're covering St. Patrick's, which is now no longer around, but you got to see great games. And it was a great chance for me to learn to be a sideline reporter. So that was a great opportunity as well. And then in lacrosse, it was my first chance to be an analyst. So I'm not sure how good I was at it, but it was a chance to, get lacrosse on the resume tape as well, which obviously led to ESPN. But that opportunity with MSG was awesome.
Yeah, I think MSG absolutely did a great job at all that. And I'm guessing from there, you're able to continue building your portfolio here. You go home to ESPN, you're doing some sideline reporting there based off the stuff you did with MSG. You're doing some play-by-play with lacrosse. You did that for quite some time. You also did some sideline reporting for NBA on TNT and as well as studio hosting for NBA TV. How do those opportunities come about for you? And what are some of your fondest memories during that time period?
Gentleman who I worked with at Classic Sports Network, Rich Kopelnick, was at the NBA for a long time. So when Classic Sports Network was bought by ESPN, he went back to NBA and he was put in charge of the talent for NBA TV. So I would always send him tapes and touch base with him, and he'd always be, not yet, not yet, not yet. And then there was where I was noticing that they were kind of down freelancers, and I realized a lot of their guys that they usually use were at the Olympics. So I called him and I said, hey, look, if you need people, I'm around. And he's like, I've been meaning to call you. I want you to bring you in for an audition. So I got to audition for them, and I got the gig. I got on their roster. So if they needed someone, I worked for them, and that was great. It was a professional place from top to bottom. You're just working with guys like Peter Vesey, Frank Isola, Ron Carter. It was just big time for me. It was like, okay, I finally, all these other News 12 jobs and Channel 10s and all these freelance jobs are worth it. I'm here at NBA TV. And that caught the eye of the people at Turner. One of my best friends, Scooter Vertino, was one of their game producers. So he, put me in touch with guys who were looking for field reporters. So I got a chance to cover the NBA playoffs. And no doubt the highlight of those 2 years was getting a chance to interview Kobe Bryant one-on-one after he hit a buzzer beater against the Suns. It wasn't my greatest performance, as you might imagine. I was really nervous. So I kind of looked like, not exactly smooth in it. But, still one-on-one interview with Kobe Bryant after a buzzer beater in the NBA playoffs that aired on national TV, I'll take. But that was a unique opportunity, and it was definitely a bummer when NBA TV moved down to Atlanta.
What were some of your other favorite events that you got to do when you were doing some broadcasting and sideline reporting?
Certainly the first sideline reporting gig I got to cover the lacrosse championships, 2007, I believe was the year. Yes, 2007, Duke, Johns Hopkins. It was an unbelievable game, but, interviewing John Danowski, then the Duke coach, after all the things that Duke had been through to come a goal short of the national championship, was very interesting. And for me, though, also it was sort of like this gig that I always wanted and had got. Another interview that always stand out to me is a live interview with Greg Schiano, Rutgers' first game after Eric LeGrand was hurt. Luckily for me, I had met Coach Schiano a bunch of times, and we knew each other through working through News 12 New Jersey and MSG, or else I really would have been really nervous. But it was a great opportunity for me because it was his first one-on-one interview. And even though we were doing it for the Big East game of the week, ESPN was carrying it on game day. So, I mean, obviously for a person like me in that role to get that kind of exposure with such an important story was a big step for me. And then, of course, obviously just getting a chance to call lacrosse national championship games. I think I called 4. When I started to call games, I'm like, all right, that's the goal. I want to call the national championship game. And it didn't look good at times. There were some years where I didn't have many games. There were definitely some years where they went with other people. But a chance not to get them and to call 4 stands out. Is something that, you want a goal and to get there, it's something I'm very proud of.
Yeah, I think those things that you mentioned are definitely life-changing type of events. I think you definitely benefited from that. So I also wanted to ask you during your time doing play-by-play, it says here that you're famous for your quote, which is I'm that kid in the corner.
Sure.
Yeah. You want to tell us the origins of that?
It's a Beastie Boys song. It's one of my favorite lines. It says, "I'm that kid in the corner." I can talk about the next lyric after that, but it's one of my, obviously one of my favorite Beastie Boys song. I'm a huge Beastie Boys fan, so yeah. I mean, you can only say from way downtown so many times, so you got to change it up a little bit. I found out later from a coach, he kind of got mad at me, one of the Leonia, which is a high school in Bergen County that I covered a lot of. He said, "Oh, my big guys are going to the corner, taking threes and saying, I'm that kid in the corner during practice. I want them down low, learning how to rebound." I'm like, "Hey, coach, at least they're watching." So, yeah, that came from. That's a Beastie Boys song, and I'll use that one for a long time.
No doubt about it. And, we have your other catchphrase, which I started the show off with, only on SNY. And now we see you mostly on SNY. How did that opportunity come about? I think it had to be exciting for you and a lot of broadcasters, where 2006, a new network's going to launch, plenty of opportunities there. And a few years into the network's history, you joined in a role, and now it's grown, obviously. But how did that opportunity come about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was a place that I was always sending my tape and resume to because it was right here in New York. When they launched, they didn't have a whole lot of guys with New York experience. Obviously, Gary Apple knows the market backwards and forwards and has been here for a while. But they kind of went out of the market, which was disappointing. Not just that they didn't hire me, but that I was hoping, sort of like Yes did the same thing, that I was hoping maybe, well, if they hire that person from New York One or that person from MSG, it'll create a spot for me. But that didn't really happen. So, again, another connection from production, but a person I worked with at ESPN, Chris Lundberg, was the news director there. So I was always peppering him. So then when there was a new news director, Brad Como, they brought me in for a meeting. So I met with Chris and Brad, and they're like, "Well, we're looking for a new debater. So we'll bring you in on a nightly basis. We'll give you a shot with Mark Malusis. We'll see how you do, and we'll go from there." And I guess I did all right because they kept bringing me back for other roles. They knew I had anchor experience. So I got a chance to anchor as a freelancer on like weekends or when people called in sick. So I was able to sort of become even more versatile because if someone called in sick on no matter what show, I got to work on it. So I worked on all the shows, Wheelhouse, Loudmouths, Kurt Gowdy Jr. gave me a chance to do play-by-play of Brooklyn Cyclones games. And then, I was always sort of interested in a full-time role, but I just started doing play-by-play. So I really wasn't ready to give it up, because I was sort of enjoying something brand new. But then when they came back, when something opened up, I guess it was 4 years ago now, I thought I was ready for it. I thought I needed to be home more. The traveling was kind of taking a grind. And I thought, this was what I always wanted to do. When I set out to be on air, I said my goal is to be on a desk in New York. And this was that opportunity. So I'm like, well, let's not let it go by this time, because if I say no to them this time, it may never come again. So let's go full-time at SNY. And I guess I'm now going into my 5th year of full-time at SNY.
So you go from debater to debating the Moose to now hosting the debates with Moose. I'm usually Sal Licata with homeschool. I always love when you're interjecting and giving your opinion as well and correcting them. And so it's always a fun segment. SNY has changed a lot since you started there. You guys were originally up by NBC, 30 Rockefeller Center. Now you have a state-of-the-art studio downtown in one of the World Trade buildings. And there's a lot of great content going on in those studios. Pretty much anyone who's watched can see, but what kind of changes have happened just during this pandemic? I know for a while there was unfortunately no programming going on. There were no shows, but now, at least you or whoever you're co-hosting with are back in the studio itself and everyone else is at home. But what kind of changes have happened there, and how has that been a challenge for you as a host?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're all dealing with Zoom. I mean, thank God it exists, but at the same point, you mentioned interjecting with Al and Moose. It's a lot easier to do when you can see them and they're right there, as opposed to when they're in their house and they can't really see you, and you don't want to interrupt them because, sometimes with the Zooms, you ruin the whole flow of the conversation. It's not as a natural conversation. As far as interjecting, you have to wait for almost them to finish. I mean, sometimes certainly I do it just as I don't want to wait to make my point, but it's that's a big difference. The fact that the people you're quote unquote debating with aren't there. It's a lot more lively and fun if you can go back and forth when you're, less than 6 feet apart from each other, let alone, doing it on a Zoom and a link. But hey, it's how we get to do the show. I'd rather have that than no show. So that's the biggest thing. And then the other big thing is just trying to fill these shows without as many sports as we used to, because the schedules are so, unnatural right now or so off calendar. Once the Mets and Yankees ended, we didn't really have anything to talk about except two football teams that at the time were really bad. I mean, the Jets are still bad, but the Giants gave us a little reprieve of something to talk about. So that's been hard to do. But now we're going to get the Knicks and the Nets back. We're going to get hockey back in January. And then before you know it, knock on wood, we'll have some form of spring training. I wish the baseball hot stove season was a little bit hotter than it is. I mean, we've been talking about the same three guys, since November, and nothing's happening. So, I don't know what baseball is doing with this off season. They're losing fans. I understand this year in the pandemic, no one has any money, but it's been this way for a while. They need a way to figure out a way to make their off season more exciting, because Trevor Bauer, you got a Cy Young Award winner and a hitting champ out there, and there's no buzz whatsoever about these two guys.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest storyline of the hot stove is an owner and Steve Cohen. So there's really no one's talking. There's players, what's going to go on. I don't know. I don't know how many times you and your producers got to get together. How could you rephrase the question? Okay, Sal, if you can only have one of the three guys, which one's it going to be? And it's just so I could see it being fatiguing for you, but at least there's been a few press conferences, so there is some stuff to talk about. And you could always take those trips down memory lane, which is something that was going on earlier on the pandemic. So hopefully there is some more movement here moving forward. Obviously, SNY is the home of the Mets, so it really takes a lot for the Mets not to lead off every Geico Sports Night. I mean, realistically, someone on the Yankees has to start a perfect game for not to talk about the Mets first, which I really enjoy, and I love just tuning in to hear the Mets news right away. But talking about the Mets, you also done some fill-in work whenever Steve Gelbs is away or at a break, or then taking some time off at spring training. So how did that come about for you, and what do you like about being the sideline or clubhouse reporter for the Mets?
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough and have been around long enough that I also filled in for Kevin Burkhart for a bunch of years. So hey, it's an exciting challenge. It's not an easy gig to fill in on, as you might imagine. Parachuting into a baseball clubhouse in August or July after the other person's been there every day, they don't really know who you are. So it's tough kind of to get stories out of them. But, at the same point, you're getting paid for a Major League Baseball team and you got a front row seat and you're working with Gary, Keith, and Ron. So they're the best at it. The truck's great. So you learn how to do another job. You just sort of have to learn on the fly. Kevin and Steve were great tools and role models to sort of how to do the job and what questions to ask. And who's good to give you information. So, it's another job you learn how to do. I mean, of course, it's exciting. If you're interviewing David Wright after a walk-off hit in a pretty full City Field, not everyone gets to do that in this business. Get to go to Wrigley and cover the Mets. So they got swept. All 4 games were exciting. No, they were going for the sweep. Excuse me. They blew a game on a Sunday afternoon. But anyway, I mean, you get the point. It's a fun gig. It's not, fun sometimes when the team isn't doing very well. The first couple of years I did it, the team wasn't very good. And you go on there in August and September and they're playing, not the most meaningful games. It's kind of tough to get stories out of the clubhouse. But, you're covering a Major League Baseball team and you're going to a Major League Baseball game. So that's a interesting gig and a whole new dynamic that I didn't have on my resume, so to speak, before I started doing it.
Any surprise to you or anybody else at SNY just how big of a star Kevin Burkhart has become?
Well, I mean, of course, this big. I mean, I go back a long time to when we were both sort of working our way up into the business. Like when I was working at Channel 10 and I would cover the New Jersey Jackals, he would be in the booth doing play-by-play. That's an independent league team that would play at Yogi Berra Stadium. And then we would see each other at some high school football games. He would fill in for me at Channel 10 News. I would see him. And so I was really happy for him, when I saw him first on the Fan and getting some work at SNY on Daily News Live. So, but you could tell he's good. We all knew he was good. And when he got the chance, to do the Met job, he was throwing a 2-0 fastball and he knocked it into the upper deck. So, I didn't know if he, to become the number 2 play-by-play NFL guy at Fox, but he's or hosting the World Series studio show with A-Rod, but hey, he deserves it. He earned it and he's great at it. So God bless.
Yeah. So you've been able to have success juggling multiple roles at once. You have ample experience doing it from your freelance days to calling games for ESPN and then anchoring for SNY and then juggling now the anchor job with being the fill-in reporter. What is your advice for people like Nick and I who are still kind of at that stage of our lives where we're trying to do the same thing, juggle multiple things at once? So what is your best piece of advice that you could give us and people who are listening to us regarding that?
Well, first is eliminate the word no from your vocabulary. So, are you available on Thanksgiving? Yes. Are you available Sunday night? Yes. Do you know anything about water polo? Yes. Have you called baseball before? Yes. I mean, you get the picture. I guess I can tell the story now because I've been there 10 years. But when Kurt Gowdy Jr. first asked me if I've ever called baseball play-by-play, I was like, yeah, in college. I maybe called one game. But I was sure as heck wasn't going to say no. And the first thing I ever did for ESPNU was college wrestling. And, I know wrestling, but I know WWE a lot more than I know college wrestling. But, it was at West Point. They didn't have to give me a hotel room or a flight, so they wanted me to do it. So I figured out how to do it. I figured out, how to do it, or I figured out the teams more than anything and let my analysts take care of me. But, I did wrestling. So that's the one thing. You have to be ready, willing, and able to do anything people ask you. And, that's what I did. I learned how to shoot. I learned how to edit, and I just learned how to do sports on the fly. I called a bunch of volleyball and I didn't really know a whole lot of volleyball. But that's the first word. And then there's just develop your own style. You want to get as many reps as possible so that you have confidence in yourself that you can do it. My first, when I called a soccer game, I wasn't confident, but now I could, by the 3rd or 4th or 5th, I had enough of a foundation that I'm ready to go call soccer. Obviously, even though I wasn't much of a play-by-play at the point, it was a lot easier to call a lacrosse game than a soccer game. But you're still not going to say no when you get a random call and say, "Hey, are you available to call the Big East Men's Soccer Championships at Rutgers in 2 weeks?" You're going to say yes, and you're going to get ready for it. So that's you don't say the word no and get as many reps as possible.
And now with the Cyclones going to High A, maybe we'll see a lot more of Cyclones games in SNY. Could be more opportunities there as well.
That's a good point. I didn't put that together. That should be interesting.
Full season. As someone who used to work with the Cyclones, great place to watch a ball game, no doubt about it.
Oh, it's great. No, it's great.
So you mentioned WWE. We got to ask you, who are your favorite wrestlers of all time?
I'm old school. I've fallen off. It's almost embarrassing how little I know about it now, but I'm a Roddy Piper guy. That was my favorite. When he and Mr. Wonderful were bad guys together, I always was kind of like bummed out when they would make the bad guys good guys. I'm like, who wants a good Roddy Piper? But, obviously I liked Hulk Hogan when he body slammed Andre the Giant. That's kind of where it ends for me. I think that was the end of my wrestling fandom, WrestleMania 3 in the Pontiac Silverdome.
You incorporated their styles into your onair stuff too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's one of the reasons. I mean, I used to love Piper's Pit. After that would be a great talk show host. Minus hitting people with coconuts and chairs, but that would be, he was awesome. Obviously, I mean, I'm not the only guy who feels that way.
Yeah, Nick and I are huge wrestling fans, and Nick is more a Mets fan and SNY guy than I am. Obviously, I'm Team Yankees over here. But this was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed having you on. We would really like to have you on again. Hopefully we could talk some more. The lacrosse bits were excellent. Again, like I said at the top, we've never had somebody who's got ample experience playing and doing lacrosse stuff professionally, broadcast stuff. So that was really cool too. But thank you again for coming on. This was a lot of fun. We appreciate you taking the time out. Merry Christmas, you, your family, everybody else. We give the last words to our guests here. If there's anything you want to share, anything else you want to promote, go right ahead. The floor is yours. Eamon, thank you very much for coming on. Again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, you and your family.
Got it. Thanks for having me on. Same to you guys. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. You guys know I only have one thing to promote. It's Geico Sports Night every night at 11, only on SNY. If you're going to open it, let's end it that way. But it was a lot of fun, fellas. And anytime you want to have me back on, I don't say no. So it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
All right, there you have it. We appreciate it so far. Very special guest, Eamon McAnaney, and for my co-host, Joe Calabrese, I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm All Right.